Somewhere in Hollow County, there's a trap line where the paperwork stopped adding up. This is the account of the ranger who ran it. She thought she was the only one keeping count. Something had been taking hogs from my traps. At first I thought it was an animal. I couldn't have been more wrong. I've spent 11 years running feral hog control for this district. I've looked at more animal remains than I care to count. Scavenged, buried, burned, hauled off in the bed of my truck to a rendering facility 2 counties over. I know what a clean kill site looks like. I know what a bear does to a carcass, what coyotes leave, what the buzzards get to by noon. None of that explains what I found next. It was the second week of October, cold enough that my breath sat in front of me at the truck, when I walked up on Station 4 expecting to find it the way I'd left it 4 days earlier. Baited, quiet, undisturbed. Instead, there was a small stack of bones sitting dead center of the corral trap, arranged into a shape too deliberate to be anything but intentional. Long bones on the bottom, ribs fanned out above them, and on top, a skull too small to be anything I'd trapped, placed with what appeared to be care. I'd field dressed the confirmed cull from that station myself 4 days before, and left it clean for pickup, same as always. I know that because I logged the ticket myself. I run 6 stations across the southern end of the district. Corral traps, mostly. Saloon door gates that swing one way, baited with corn and left to run open for a week or 2 before I trigger them, so a whole sounder learns to trust the corn instead of just the one brave hog that finds it first. It's slow work. It's supposed to be slow work. Feral swine root up a wetland faster than anything else on the mountain. The state doesn't pay me to catch one hog at a time. They pay me to catch the group. I've got a collared sow 2 watersheds over that I use to find new sounders when they move. Everyone in the business calls that a Judas pig. I never liked the name. I never stopped using it either. I know this work. I know what belongs on a hog station and what doesn't. That's why the shape in that trap registered as wrong before I'd even finished counting the ribs. I photographed it, same as I'd photograph anything unusual for the log, and moved on to Station 5. I told myself a coyote had dragged something in from somewhere else, that I was reading intention into an accident. I've been doing this long enough to know that's usually the answer. It usually is a coyote, or a bear that's found an easy meal and gotten possessive about defending the spot. I wrote coyote activity in the margin of my log and went on with my week. 4 days later, Station 2. Same layout, different bones. These didn't scan as hog at all. Too long in the leg, wrong curve to the ribs. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to place them against anything I'd trapped or seen dead on this mountain. Coming up empty. No drag marks leading in, no drag marks leading out. Just the stack of bones, sitting in the dead center of the trap like it had grown there. I called it in that afternoon. My supervisor's a good man, 20-some years in the district office, and he did what any of us would have done with a report like that. He offered me the easy explanation. Bear, probably, caching food the way they do before den season, or coyotes that had picked up on the smell of my bait and decided the corral was easier hunting than the woods. He wasn't wrong to say it. It's the likeliest explanation. I accepted it because I didn't have an alternate explanation. For 8 days after that, nothing. I checked my stations, logged my counts, drove the loop road at the same hour every morning with the windows down so I'd hear if anything was moving in the brush. Nothing moved. I started to believe the coyote story myself. Then I found the tally mark. I keep a running count at each station, written on a paper sheet clipped inside a weatherproof box that is bolted to the trap frame. I put 1 line per confirmed cull with my initials beside each one. It's a habit from before GPS units were reliable out here, and it's one I've never broken. Paper doesn't need batteries. It doesn't lie about what day it says it is. Station 3's sheet had 11 lines on it that morning. I had logged 10. The 11th wasn't really in my handwriting at all. It was trying to be. Letters shaped like something that had watched me write 100 times and never once held a pen itself. Strokes gone back over 2 and 3 times where mine go down clean in 1. The hook at the end of the initial worked and reworked until it had nearly torn through the paper, like whatever made it understood a hook was supposed to be there and didn't know why. Dated 2 days prior for a station I hadn't visited that day at all. I stood there a long time with that sheet in my hand. That same afternoon, the trap at Station 1 was sprung and empty. Not broken into, sprung clean, gate down, exactly the way it's supposed to work when a hog trips the trigger. But there was no hog inside, no hog dead nearby. The gate hadn't been touched, still latched the way I'd set it, nothing forced, nothing chewed through. The ground told a story I didn't like. Drag marks, faint, starting on the outside of the back panel, 6 feet of welded stock fence a hog has no way of clearing on its own, and leading not toward the tree line the way anything running from a trap would go, but along the old boundary fence toward the corner post where the National Forest ends and the Whitaker parcel starts. Private land. An inn holding the Forest Service never bought out when they drew this section. My authority stops at that post. I followed the drag marks past it anyway, boots catching on blackberry cane, my hand resting on my holster. I didn't radio it in. I didn't mark a waypoint. The light was already going by the time I came up on it. Sunken foundation stones, a chimney base standing alone, what was left of a homestead that had come down generations back. That flat gray light you get right before true dusk, where color starts leaving the woods before the sun's actually gone. And there was something crouched at the edge of the foundation stones, low over something on the ground, moving with the kind of economy you only see in a body that's done a task 1,000 times before. I stopped walking. I didn't decide to stop. My legs stopped. It wasn't fast, whatever it was doing. It was careful, unhurried, the way I am unhurried when I'm field dressing something I respect enough to do right. And then it went still, all at once, the way a deer goes still, not frozen from surprise, but a stillness with intention behind it, a stillness that meant it had heard me before I'd made a sound worth hearing. It lifted its head. There was bone where a face should have been, not a mask, not something worn, bone the way a skull is bone, pale even in that failing light, catching what little was left of it. It didn't run. It looked at me the way I look at something I've caught and am deciding what to do with. For several seconds, neither of us moved. And I understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind's caught up to agreeing with it, that I had interrupted something, not discovered it. I got myself back to the truck. I don't remember every step of that walk, but I remember brush breaking off to my left the whole way, keeping pace with me through timber too thick to see into. It was matching my stride whether I sped up or didn't. I didn't look. I remember it was full dark by the time I made it to the truck, its sound falling off somewhere around the old cattle lane. It was like it had let me get that far and decided that was far enough. I remember the fence wire that caught my forearm going over the old boundary line. A long, clean scrape I didn't feel until I was behind the wheel, doors locked, hands shaking too hard to get the key into the ignition on the first try. Standard protocol, when I confirm a cull at a station, is to field dress it clean and leave the carcass at the site overnight for pickup. A contracted service collects them for disposal, usually within a day or two, sometimes longer if the schedule's backed up. I have done this correctly, by the book, at every station in this district for 11 years. And it occurred to me, somewhere around mile 3 with my hands still not steady on the wheel, that every carcass I have ever left clean, dressed, and waiting at a station has stayed exactly that, however long it took the truck to come collect it. I had been doing the work. I had just never once considered that something might be drawn in as well. That first week home, I posted what I'd found to a wildlife control forum I've used for years. Professionals, mostly. Trappers and USDA contractors comparing notes on nuisance calls. No names, no station numbers, just the layout of the bones and a description of what I'd seen at the homestead. I expected somebody to tell me black bear. I expected somebody else to tell me I needed more sleep. Instead, 3 separate replies used the same 2 words before I'd typed them myself. Raw head. One linked me to what I'd have called nonsense a month earlier. Raw head and bloody bones. An old boogeyman out of these mountains and the Ozarks both. It was tied to butchering, always about somebody who didn't dress an animal right, or didn't leave behind what they owed. Another account, old enough and specific enough that I believed it more than I wanted to, told me the stacking wasn't a threat. It was a receipt. Somebody, sometime, had decided my station owed something, and the debt hadn't been paid off in full. I'd been leaving the tab open long enough for it to start collecting on its own. Nobody in that thread could tell me how to close it out. A few said not to bother trying. I backed all the way to the truck that first night back without turning around, the way you're trained to retreat from anything that might charge. Face it, give ground, don't offer your back. Whatever was pacing me in the brush never crossed the cattle lane. I don't know if that means it couldn't or didn't want to. I sat in the cab a long while before I trusted myself to drive. Long enough that when I finally reached for the glove box, habit, reaching for the spare pen I keep there to jot mileage before I forget it, I found the duplicate tally sheet I keep folded in there. The copy that exists nowhere but that truck, in nobody's hand but mine. There was a new line on it, dated that day, initialed with the hook. I hadn't written it.